And it's a real accomplishment. And you've spent a week with that verse. And that is also classical.
Welcome to Classical Etc. You're in the studio with Memoria Press.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Classical Etc. I'm Jessica Aboud, and we are back with the Core 4 from Christmas break. We haven't been at the table together in a while.
It's true. And we did all take a Christmas break.
We did. And a New Year's break. So glad to have everybody back. Paul, how's the farm?
Cold
Okay.
right now.
And snowy.
And snowy and icy.
And icy.
Yeah.
And this morning I went out because last night we were getting warnings for freezing fog. I've never seen
Yes,
that
I
warning
saw that.
before.
That's
we got a
not
warning
snow?
for no. But when I went out, all of the cows, they have like, normally you don't even notice, they have like little whiskers.
Yeah.
And those all had little frost on them. It was beautiful. It was beautiful.
I know, but the
Did Sarah
poor
get
little
No, don't think about it. No,
The poor animals are freezing.
No,
but they
no.
look good.
No, so let me just be clear about this. I walked out. I've been wearing contacts instead of glasses since the cold because otherwise you walk inside or outside a building and it just fogs over, right? Well, this morning I went out to do the chores with my glasses on and I walked into the barn with all the cows and immediately fogged up. Like it is warm in there. They're fine. But, you get to see this, and everything was coated with this like tiny crystals because the frost, it wasn't just normal frost.
It was
because
fog.
It was fog that had frozen on
froze.
stuff, and it was beautiful, but it's cold.
But
I'm
it's
ready
cold.
for the cold.
It's so cold. Yeah.
It's very
And I
cold.
can't walk outside now because there's so much snow. There's
Right.
just this little path, for cars to drive
Yeah.
through the neighborhood. But if a car came, I don't have any place to go. I'd have to jump into 10 inches of snow.
All the Northerners are laughing at us, I'm sure,
right.
but we don't handle this well.
Nope.
We don't, but we're going to handle it better than Atlanta, who's going to get it.
Oh, no.
Meanwhile, our friends in California, I don't know when this
That's
podcast
they're
is going out,
evacuating.
are frying.
Yeah,
That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Isn't that
It sounds
crazy?
horrible out there.
Natural disasters.
Mhm.
Yes.
Well, while we've been cozy inside, has anybody been reading anything good?
I read Bambi,
Did you? Oh,
Did
yes.
you the original?
the
Bambi?
original Bambi, a new translation of the original Bambi. I greatly enjoyed it. It was wonderful. The introduction that came with it was garbage, but
Isn't it allegory?
no,
No,
it's not. That's what the introduction tried to make the point, and I don't
Okay.
think it fits at all.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
But wonderful nature story. I can absolutely see why it was a phenomenon when it came out serialized. I mean, it's just very enjoyable reading about the natural world.
And the deer that you kill every year.
Yes.
The one thing that I think the introduction did get right is that only a hunter could write with that kind of respect of the natural world and all the detail that he knew because he spent so much time in the woods observing it all
That
carefully.
makes sense.
So
Anya?
Well, I started reading Wolf Hall because
Oh, right.
that's our Memoria Press book. But then I realized that in a week and a half, I have a meeting with the upper school lit teachers about Scarlet Letter. So I put Wolf Hall down, and now I'm rereading Scarlet Letter for the third time. That has never been my favorite novel, but I'm really enjoying it
Really?
this time. It's amazing. Sometimes I
Penn?
read a book over and over and still don't like it, but I'm really enjoying it more this time.
that speaks to your open mind, Tanya, right? Because most people, like, you don't like a book and you go back to reread it because you have to, and you're like, I'm not gonna like this.
Right.
The fact that you can change that, that's amazing.
Well, and that's one I taught back in the day.
Mm.
And I remember liking it more the more I read it.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I honestly wonder if it wouldn't be more meaningful. I mean, we do it in 9th grade, and that's very young, but just if they already knew, I think that makes a difference too, because then you can actually get Hawthorne's all the foreshadowing, and you're really getting that because all the characters and what happens to them. And so you can actually see that process. I know you don't want to do that because you want to see, can they figure it out? But I think that's why I'm enjoying it more, is that I know what's coming, and I know the motives behind the characters.
Well, when you have multiple layers of meaning in a story, You don't see them on the first read.
Right.
You see
that's
a lot more of them on the second read,
So
and then even more of them on the third read.
But I think it's still good to expose young students to them, to the story. But then I don't know that they can really have an appreciation for it unless they do a reread.
But they can get the first level of.
I think this would be so fun to teach. I would love to teach that novel.
Oh, yeah. No, he's got some good short stories too. His short stories are the same way.
How about you, Martin?
I am, well, I have been, I decided over the Christmas break, I'm going to get all my stuff out, the boxes that I still haven't gone through. And so I'm actually very organized now.
Wow. It only took 40 years.
And so I had misplaced things, and I had, so I finally found my copy of Portrait of a Lady again. And so I need to get back to that. But there's a book that has just recently come out that I'm going to be reviewing for Memoria, which is the journal of Memoria College.
.org. Got it.
And so it's called Mortal Secrets, Freud, Vienna, and the Discovery of the Modern Mind by Frank Tallis. And it is really excellent. Freud's one of those figures that we kind of live in the cultural shadow of. There's all of these things. We wouldn't think the way we think a lot now as a culture if it weren't for Freud. And that's good and bad.
I was going to say, I don't know that I would consider that a good thing.
No, it's not. It's not a good thing. And the author is not, pushing Freudianism. He's kind of telling you where it came from, and it's so it's a mixed review of Freud, and in fact, even most psychologists apparently now see his faults. But it's just this chronology of, number one, how he got his views, and in some of the at least the labels, and really his theories themselves came from his reading of classic literature. The Oedipus complex. If you look, what you see is that he was living at the time of all these great excavations by Heinrich Schliemann of Troy, and they were digging up all of this old stuff. And the author points out, and I never thought of this before, this is how Freud saw himself, as an excavator of the modern mind. And it was like this aha moment reading the book. I hadn't thought about that, but that's exactly how he viewed the human mind. You get all the stuff out, and you keep asking your patient all these questions, and then you think you can explain their behavior because of that.
Have you read the Promise by Potok?
I have not.
You should read that. Since you're dealing with Freud, you should read that. Okay. No, we read The Chosen, and then I loved it so much, I decided to go back and read the sequel, which I'm so glad I did. And honestly, I think if you've read The Chosen, you have to read The Promise.
Really?
Okay,
yes.
So you're saying I should read The Promise in relation to this?
I do.
But do you have to have read The Chosen to understand The Promise?
No, but it sure makes it a lot better because you know those characters.
Yeah.
You know who they are. You know what they've been through. It's a much richer read if you start with The Chosen.
Because in the Chosen, the rabbi's son he keeps digging further and further into Freudian psychology.
Yes.
Like that's what he wants to study.
And he's an
That's
adult.
why I think Tanya's bringing this
Was there
up.
a movie
that's
made
right.
from that? Rod Steiger.
I don't
Is that
know.
the one?
No idea.
I don't feel like The Chosen would make for a good movie.
I thought one of them
wouldn't
was,
be a
but-
lot
okay.
of
Action.
not a lot of action.
Style.
Man, I love that book.
Okay. Sounds good.
Well, we get a lot of wonderful listener questions to our inbox podcast at memoriapress.com. And I thought I would read a recent email from Abby to you and see if we can help her out. She has a question about her first grader and Memoria Press curriculum. This is what Abby writes. Thank you all for such a helpful, uplifting podcast. I would love to hear a breakdown of the parts of Memoria Press curriculum, what the objective is, and practical tips for doing each part well. My oldest is in first grade, and I'm still struggling with getting traction. Well, thank you, Abby, for writing us, and we would love to help you. She says she has a first grader, so I wanted to see if we could get to her answers and maybe just talk about the primary grades, which would be kindergarten, first grade, second grade. and help answer her questions about practical tips, but maybe before that, big picture. And I wanted to start with you, Tanya.
Okay.
Because she asks about a breakdown of the parts of what we offer for first grade. Can you explain the different parts of the primary grades, how we do it?
Primary K to 2 are really all the same. Yeah. They function in the same way, except in kindergarten they don't know how to read yet. But our main focus is phonics, reading, writing fluently, fluent writing. That's why we start cursive in first grade. And math facts, basic math. And then the rest of the curriculum is all tied up into enrichment, which is the supplemental part. We would say, if you don't get your phonics and reading, your writing and your math done, then you shouldn't even do enrichment. That you really have to get those things done, because if your child can't read, can't do basic math, you can't move forward. Right. If your child hasn't done science or history, it doesn't stop them from moving forward. So those are the basic skills, and that's how we've broken it down. And then it changes in every grade. Like in second grade for enrichment, we add a couple of supplements. But it basically, each of those grades functions the same. And our goal is that we are preparing them for the grammar school, which we would say begins in third grade. And so in order to prepare them for that, they need to be able to write fluently. They need to know their math facts cold. And they need to be able to read fluently. And then we can do what we need to do in the grammar school, which then leads us to being able to do what we need to do in the high school. And Cheryl always said to our primary teachers that they were doing the most important work in the school.
Yes.
Because the primary grades you can't do, until you've mastered those, you can't move forward. And so the work that they do allows our students eventually to read Shakespeare and Dante.
And they really do come into, like, when you do that, the especially like the phonics work in kindergarten well, and you do the reading and spelling work well in first grade and second grade, they really do come into third grade at a very high fluency. So in third grade, they take on a lot, but because the real focus in kindergarten, first, second grade are those three things, it's not just that they have familiarity with those things, but they really have mastered it to a great degree. Because like in third grade, we're still doing a little bit of penmanship. We're still solidifying some,
but we expect that they are writing quickly and fluently,
and in cursive
and beautifully.
Right? And they've done print, they've done cursive, and they can do that well and beautifully. And that's I think the thing we really focus on, the way I see it in third and fourth grade, when it comes to handwriting, is keeping it beautiful.
That's right. That's right. Because they will slide. If you give them an inch, they will take a mile. If you don't force them to write in cursive, they are not going to do it. And I don't know why, because they love it when they learn it, but then all of a sudden they're just stubborn little.
Yeah, if I can
sinners.
Yeah. Permission to make an analogy here. There's a good sports analogy for this, and that is... Oh,
gosh, now you sound like Shane. Am I going to have a book on this?
Possibly. But you when you first are doing a sport, you have to do like drills that are not the sport. It's not the game yet, right?
I always hated practices as a kid.
Well, everybody hates it, but it's stuff you got to do.
Basketball, you practice over and over the skill of how to shoot.
Right.
Yeah. So you're not playing basketball.
It's very much like, if you're on a football team, you're doing all these specific drills, and you got the tires out there, and you're doing those kind of things, and it's very different from playing the sport.
Yeah.
But you will play the sport better if you learn to do those things. And so I think that's one way to look at this, because we have this impatience in everything, really. We want to begin with the end, and you got to begin at the beginning.
And that's what the primary stage is.
Yeah, this is one of the major educational fallacies. Is this we think that we can just go straight to what we want to do, and we can't. And so it's I just called the fallacy of educational impatience. And so I think in those early years, you are prepared. They're just preparation. You're preparing them to be able to do the things they should start doing in 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, right? And so there is this, and the other further problem here is there's a big gap between what they can understand and what they can read. For just to take reading as an example, right? Their reading skills are far below their understanding skills. And the whole language movement, the sort of anti-phonics movement we've had around for so long, you thought we could go right for the understanding. And you can't. You have to have patience. And yes, there is that gap between your reading ability and what you can understand, but that gap is not jumped by some bad reading methodology. That gap is jumped by reading to them, right? That jumps that gap, in the time that it's there. And really, after your reading ability has come up to your understanding, your level of understanding, you don't need read alouds anymore, but you still do it for a few years after that.
You still do it.
Because,
you did it to your kids when
I
adults.
did it, because it was communal.
Right. It just became part of your family life.
Right.
Yeah.
And even in class, it can become a communal thing, and you're all in the same place, you're all listening, and you're at the same spot in the story. So there's other value to that later.
Yeah, and talking about those read alouds, right? Like Tanya mentioned, we got reading, writing, arithmetic, and you've got this enrichment. And that enrichment in K-2, it's all read aloud to the students, right? So that's bridging that gap. And but also that enrichment is almost, it feels like, it can feel like a break to the students.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
It's the fun part of the curriculum.
Right? And so, yes, you need to get your reading, writing, and arithmetic done, but you could do the other stuff outside of your regular school time, right? If you can't get to it in your school day, that stuff, because that can be fun stuff.
And it can be a family thing.
Yes.
You can do, if you've got other children, they can all participate in the enrichment. And I would say too, I said reading, writing, and math. If you don't get anything else done, that's fine. But Martin made a good point. The enrichment is tied around a read aloud a week. And if you don't get anything else done, you should, even if it's not our read aloud, you should be reading aloud to your child every day. And so that is a part of daily education too.
Yeah, and that's also the place. See, we want to, you say, how does classical education manifest itself in phonics?
I was going to ask that, like
math drills, arithmetic drills, in those penmanship exercises. Well, if you go back and you look at Quintilian. He's talking about you got to get the basics done first, and that's really as classical as anything else. But we don't think about it as classical. We think about the stories, and we think about those things as being classical. And you can accomplish that in your read alouds. That's where the classical action, the specific classical actions going on while you're doing all that preparation stuff. That's just really classical anyway still.
And the other way I think that you can accomplish it is with the copybook. So people see the copybook and they see there's this one little scripture verse a week, one a week that they have to copy. But it's not, you're going to hand this to your child and get it copied and then check it off your list. It really is a week's worth of work, because first you're going to put the verse on the board, talk about it, read the Bible story connected to it, if it's a scripture rather than a poem. And if it's a poem, what does it mean? Do we understand all the words? Then we turn it into a language lesson. What's capitalized? Where is there a period? What's this little thing that's called a semicolon? All of those things that you talk about on one day, and then you just put it up. And then the next day you bring it back out and you maybe copy it and you start trying to memorize it. So you're working with that disappearing line technique with it still on the board. And the next day you would take it back out and have them proofread what they've done and see if anything needs to be corrected. Because if you read it, if you copy it, and then proofread it all at the same time, that's just a lot for the little guy. I mean, the accomplishment is copying it. It's not saying, okay, you did this wrong and this wrong and this wrong and you need to fix this. It's literally, look at this. You have successfully finished this task. But then the next day, when you bring it back out and it's fresh, you have a little bit to correct maybe, continue to memorize, do a formal recitation for the family. And it's a real accomplishment. And you've spent a week with that verse. And that is also classical. It's not just a workbook to work on your penmanship. It's so much more.
We're going deep, is what you're saying. Like that when you're saying it's classical, like this principle of we're not just rushing through stuff, but we're living with it. Yeah, we're trying to stew in it and marinate in it, and then it becomes a part of us,
which we've talked about before with memorization and recently, I think.
Yes, but also the way we're doing that memorization, I think what Tanya pointed out is very important. It's not just that we want them to memorize that content, but that we also, like she said the first day, we're going to talk about it. We're going to help them understand what this is saying, and then we're going to memorize it. Yeah. And so it's not memory outside of context. It's memory with understanding. And so there's always this, like what Martin was talking about, like the desire to have these skills to be able to read, but like wanting to know this content. There's always that tension there, right? But because memorization doesn't require necessarily knowing all the phonetics of it, you can immediately have them start memorizing things because they can stand up and they can recite that.
They can't spell it. They can't
and sometimes
write
you can comprehend
it.
Right.
And we don't talk about memorization enough. This was huge. This was a huge thing in classical education. I mean, if you had one technique, it's probably memorization, because it applies to all those things we're talking about. Of course, and for the ancients, one of the reasons they were memorizing is because they didn't have so many written things.
Right.
So we now have all of these texts that are available to us, and we think we can use that as an excuse not to memorize, but we lose something if we don't do that. There was another reason that was important, just to get it in your brain. You cannot know anything without your memory. I mean, so develop this faculty as best you can.
Yeah. This from the man that showed up 30 minutes late for the podcast.
Oh,
I don't know what you're talking about.
He forgot when it was.
See, I did memorize as a child. It's confirmation of what I'm saying.
Oh, and here we are today. Don't be like Martin.
See what I mean? It's proof.
Well, I think your copybook that advice was so helpful, and staying in the lane of practical. What would you say to Abby or a parent who has a primary age child? How would you help them acclimate to the structure? Because that might be kind of new.
It is structure. And the other thing is, if you started our curriculum in first grade, then, it takes several weeks to get then the routine. And it is very routine. Every week is about the same, but starting in kindergarten with our phonics program, it just kind of flows into first grade. So when you start in first, you really are starting like at the end of our phonics, and which is fine. And then we start reading real books almost immediately rather than phonetic readers anymore. So that's a little different. I think that just concentrating on those things that you have to get done would take some pressure off. And just knowing that you really don't need to spend, if your child, like I had a child, that wrote so slowly. And so we had to work up to just writing a little bit more every day, rather than just, this is what the curriculum manual says you have to do. So I want to check this box off. So, if you're homeschooling, there's some flexibility there. If you can't get a day's work finished, that's okay. Just save that checkbox for the next day. Do the best you can and continue. You just need to be making progress. So for writing, if your child can write 2 sentences a day, then save the rest of story time for the next day. But with the goal that you're going to get to where your child can write the whole thing.
But also, if you have a student who does things well and does them quickly, you don't necessarily need to spend the equivalent of an entire school day doing this stuff. You can
then you can do the enrichment.
Do the enrichment. Take the afternoon to go outside and explore and like all of that, because we don't that is enough work for every student.
It is.
You don't need to say, okay, well, you did this very quickly, and so therefore I'm going to reward you that by doing more work.
Yeah, no.
Right?
No, it's not necessary.
Yeah.
And the other thing that could be a real challenge is Memoria Math Challenge. Could be a real challenge if a first grader didn't do it all through kindergarten. Because
are those speed drills?
Yes, that's the speed drills. And I think that people don't realize, and maybe we should just add something in the teaching guidelines if this is the first year you've done this. And I don't know that it is. She doesn't really say she didn't use Memoria Press last year, but just in case, we spend so much time in kindergarten just teaching our students to look up and down and get their time. It's not really a time drill at this point. It really is just the timer starts at 0 and it just starts clocking up so they get used to it. There should be no anxiety, no pressure. But our kids have done it in kindergarten every day for a year. So when they get to first grade, it's not new to them. And so we're showing them, I don't know what first grade starts with, I think 50 problems, which we've gradually worked up to in kindergarten. So if it's too much work, if that's too much, then just cut the page off and make it 25 problems.
And do the rest tomorrow.
Right. Or just throw them away.
Yeah.
I think people need to realize that they have flexibility to do what works for them, knowing this is a great goal here, but we may not be here yet. And that's okay. We're going to get there. These are fundamental skills. And so you can't really rush them. And then we've also in kindergarten worked really hard on manuscript. But then when we get to first grade, we're teaching cursive, but we're continuing to do all of our work in manuscript, which we expect to be very neat. So we're practicing manuscript for a full year until we transition to cursive. So that, that back and forth too could be a little bit daunting for students. And honestly, I think if it feels like too much, I don't know why you wouldn't just drop cursive until the next year and just really get a handle on manuscript and just not, if you need to drop something, you can't drop reading and you can't drop writing at all. I mean, you've got to build those muscles because writing is it's a real struggle for many students, and you can't drop math facts.
And so you would say, because I feel for Abby, she says, I'm still struggling with getting traction. And we don't know exactly the root of it. But if you could give her a focal point for first grade, or maybe a focal point for kindergarten, first grade, second grade, what would it be?
For all of them, it would be those things. Yeah. Reading, writing, math, just basic skills and mastering basic skills.
And would we say that you would include traditional spelling in first and second grade as part of reading because it's phonetics?
Absolutely.
I just want to make that clarification. When we say reading, writing, arithmetic, spelling is, it's partially writing because they're encoding, but it's also partially reading because they're going through those phonetic sounds again that they went through in sort of a decoding way in kindergarten. Now they're going through it in an encoding way in first grade, second grade.
And it's also really important to do the pre-reading activities in the teacher guide for story time and to do the post-reading. Yes, even if your child is reading fluently. It's so good because that's going to help with their spelling. Is those words, like we start with little bear. Little and bear. Those are both very hard words for a first grader. But if we talk about them beforehand and if we look at the concepts, the phonetic concepts that are in there, then when they get to them in the book, they're not afraid of them. And I love starting the day with a recitation just to really, but again, if you start in first grade, the first 8 weeks is a review of kindergarten, and it may be a lot of facts your child doesn't know. So either skip them or teach them right then and slow it down. Just slow it down. I think you just need permission to slow it down and not think you have to do everything. To get to the enrichment is a wonderful thing, to do the little science activities and the little history. It's the fun part. But if you don't get to it, no guilt.
I think that's going to be encouraging for a lot of people. When it comes to, go
well, I was
Martin.
going to say, I mean, what I hear a lot of is, well, my child, they can't see where this is going. And my answer is always, so what? They don't need to know that. They just need to do it.
Oh,
the
gosh.
parent needs to know it.
Yes.
That's where that's
right.
where that it gets really bad, if they don't see where it's going. But if you as a parent know where it's going, you know, you can just assure your child that this is going somewhere, but they don't need to know the end. Right? They just need to do their work.
And we do recommend that parents, when they get their material, sit down and read over it.
Oh, yes.
So that they
and I'm sure
can
she
kinda
has
navigate.
done that.
Right.
Yes. And
Right.
to, because she's obviously concerned about the job that she's doing. And I think that she's probably doing an excellent job. And just, it's not easy. It's really difficult. I honestly think homeschooling primary, if you're not a primary teacher, is the hardest.
Really?
Once they can read and write, then it's a lot. I would never have taught K to 2.
Oh, I remember being asked in an interview what grades I want to teach. I said, I'll take anything, but I think I prefer middle school or high school. Well, then when I sat and watched a primary teacher, thankfully they assigned me middle school.
Was it Mrs. Tiefer-Tiller?
No, it was other teachers, but I went and sat and watched in kindergarten through second grade. And I just walked out of there and I said, they are magicians. I mean, those teachers are doing something. I mean, they are going from absolutely nothing, especially in kindergarten. The kids cannot read. And then they go from reading. It is an infinite jump from having nothing to having something. And it's mind blowing. I would be daunted if I had to teach a child without any other help, if I was a homeschooling parent.
Yes.
To read.
And it requires a lot more energy.
And patience.
And patience.
Oh, my goodness. And so I would also say that, to Martin's point about the student not knowing where they're going, I think the real benefit of starting each morning with a recitation is it shows students what they know. It shows them how much they've learned, because they're able to do those questions. You can do a slew of questions in 5 minutes. And they see before they ever have to start any new work, look what we've done. And, just to tell them that, look how much you know, and have them perform for other people.
Well, that's true. But it also is just true that if you establish a routine, if it becomes a routine, they don't think to question it. It's just what you do.
Yeah. I did not realize until I was in 8th grade that other people don't study Latin. Because I was the youngest child. My older sisters, they started Latin in 3rd grade. I started Latin in 3rd grade. And we just did Latin. And then finally, when I went to a different private school in 8th grade, and it was a 7th grade and up private school, and the dean's trying to work out, well, have you studied Latin before or not? And I'm like, wait, other people didn't study Latin in 3rd grade and up? I mean, just, I was, right. You just don't, as a child, you don't ask that question. And Martin's absolutely right. That routine provides that structure, so they don't ask that question. They will ask that question in middle school. They will start going, hey, why am I studying algebra? I'm never going to use it, am I?
If you've been doing it consistently, daily, all the way up till middle school, I'm not sure they'll do it anymore. I mean, I think that mostly still happens.
No, they will.
I think they will, because also they have friends outside of the routine, right? But also, I think it also depends on what we as the parent or the teacher are, the side comments we make, right? Like if you say in front of your child, I don't understand why we're doing this, or they hear that under your breath, then they're gonna be doubting why you're making them do it, right? And I mean, that happens to teachers all the time, right? I mean, I had a professor once tell me, well, these are the requirements and I don't agree with them, but I have to make you do them.
Well, and let's admit there are a lot of cases where particularly classical schools will get in teachers who, and they don't have any experience with Latin, but they're required to teach it. And so they're not sold on why you're doing that. And so that's when you get that under the breath comments.
But as a parent or a teacher, you fake it till you make it, right? And if you don't understand why you're doing it, then you need to go ask somebody, hey, why is this in here? Call us, email us, whatever, or talk to your friends and say, what's going on here? there is a reason, people try to act rationally. And so when people design things, they try to design them rationally.
Right.
Like I ask that question about, cars and machines all the time. Like, why is this way? Well, somebody had a reason for doing it that way. Right. I just don't understand it. But,
that's what, I don't see why it would need this part as you're putting the thing down. Right. And you later find out why it's necessary because it doesn't work without it.
But there is a learning curve, even when you think about maybe how you learned phonics or reading and then how we do it, how our traditional spelling program works. When I look through it, I think, I didn't know that word. I didn't know that was the word for how you teach vowels. And there is a lot of learning.
I think still can't figure out the difference between a team and a blend. But
I get that question.
Tara helped me.
Did she?
Because a team, the word team has EA in it. It has a vowel team in it. So then I know that's two vowels that make one sound.
Whereas
and a blend has two blends in it, blah and nd. So then
it's got two letters that make two sounds.
Two different sounds. Yes.
Oh,
how about that?
Know that?
That's the primary teachers, I'm telling you.
Yeah.
They've got a lot of knowledge in there.
Hey, that's where the action's at.
But
Paul and I, we're upper school people.
Writing your studies. You're not changing the world.
It is a special thing to be a primary teacher. And as a homeschooler, I feel scary. The responsibility, but the fact is, if you just continue plugging on and doing the work, and then your child will excel.
Well, particularly if you're coming as a parent, if you're coming from an education that didn't have any of this, you don't know it.
Right.
I mean, we now have a generation of classically educated kids some of whom are going to become teachers. They will understand that. But when you're at home doing it and you didn't have that kind of education, it is hard to see what this all ends up in. And all we can do is sort of articulate that to them because, we did a lot of things with our kids. We were first generation classical education people, and we didn't see exactly why this was but we trusted it. I trusted Cheryl.
We trusted her.
And you see now the results of it as your kids are older, and they are going to make sure that their kids are classically educated. And because they were, most of my kids and in-law kids, were classically educated themselves. So, they don't have that problem of having to be inspired all the time.
But when it comes down to the nitty-gritty of knowing what you're teaching, very few people remember their phonetic instruction.
That's right.
Oh, right.
I don't think, maybe nobody does. And so for anybody jumping into primary to teach as an adult, you are having to relearn these things because you haven't used the term vowel team or blend for the past 20 years.
Even though you use it all the time. You can't, it's hard to look back reflectively.
Right? How do you teach it?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Right. Just because you use it doesn't mean you can teach it.
So those people that don't have a classical background, don't think you're at that huge of a disadvantage when it comes to those sorts of things. Because even classically educated people have to go back and go, well, I haven't looked at this content for 20, 25, 30 years now. I have to brush up on it.
It's the problem that a lot of very smart, well-educated people have is they make too many assumptions about the students they're teaching. It is really hard to go take yourself back to your own education, but it's something you
kind of person you were in the 7th grade.
Right. Because, it's hard to understand people who talk, in terms of a student, it's hard to understand people who talk to you and they're making all these assumptions that you don't have. And we just got to remember that it's one of the things you learn, I think, over years of education is how to talk to students in a way that they will understand, because in order to do that, well, you have to know what they don't know. And so if you know that if you say a particular thing, you're going to have to explain it. Right. So that's
the advantage to homeschooling, though.
Yes, it is.
Is that you have been there. Like we say, a 5th grade teacher here,
right,
has no idea
what they've been doing, or what they know. The kids know more than the teacher, because the kids know about Rome and they know about like 100 grammar questions
They've been in Latin
that the
for a couple of
teachers
years.
don't know. The teachers don't know Latin.
Right. And that's just academically, right? That's what's happened in the school. The teacher doesn't know what's happened in the home.
Right. Well,
Right?
that's right. But the homeschool parent has been all the way through with their child. So they have a huge advantage because they've done it.
Because I mostly taught junior high and up. And so you have kids coming into your classroom, they've done Famous Men of Rome, and they've done, and they know a whole lot more than you do.
Right.
You know, it'd be good if you did, because then you'd have some references you could use and, you know, metaphors you could use. But this is the thing with classical education being the recovery of classical education is that we are attempting to teach things that we don't know. And that is a challenge.
Which means we are all learning every day. I mean, constantly have to be.
That's fun.
Yes. It should be something that you enjoy going, oh, wait, I didn't know that. I'm going to go learn that. And now I'm going to pass it on.
Yeah. Well, Abby, we're rooting for you.
and we may not have even answered her question. I mean, if she wants to email us back and tell us exactly, you know, if we haven't answered your questions, Abby.
Right. If she wants to give us more granular questions, we're happy to give.
We'll be happy to answer them and anybody else's questions.
That's right. At podcast at memoriapress.com. Right?
Perfect.
Yep. We'd love to hear from you. I think that's a wrap. Well, thanks for joining us. And thank you for joining us. We will see you next time. Thanks for joining us today on Classical Etc. by Memoria Press. If you like what you heard, please like, subscribe, or share this episode or comment. We love to hear your questions and your comments. If you want to learn more about Memoria Press, please go to memoriapress.com. This has been Classical Etc. We're so glad you joined us, and we'll see you next time.